There's one subject that keeps coming up in my exploration of Jeep forums and Jeep pages, and pretty much anybody with a solid axle front end knows what I'm talking about. There's this little thing called death wobble, where if you hit a bump or you hit a certain speed, your steering wheel will start to shake uncontrollably, and the only way to stop it is to slow down, and it can be really scary. I haven't heard of anyone losing control of their vehicle or anything, but it's very, especially when it happens the first time, it's very frightening. And I just wanted to explain a little bit about it and ways to fix it, because it keeps coming up over and over and over again. And I found this list that you should go through if you want to fix your death wobble. Also, I am not a qualified mechanic. I don't have any certifications or anything, but this is kind of a little bit common sense, and I do have a bit of experience with it. I did have death wobble on my Jeep, and I do not anymore, so take what I say with a grain of salt. It's definitely a valid checklist to go through. Death wobble to most people is the uncontrollable shaking of the steering wheel, and literally the front of the car, both front tires are kind of like skipping around, and it's usually going down the highway. Here's what's really going on underneath. What causes that shimmy that you feel in the steering wheel or the excess wobble is basically forces counteracting themselves. So here's the first situation. Say this is your tire and this is your tire. If you have too much toe this way and or this way, your tires are going to want to do this, and obviously if they go to, they're not gonna, your tie rod prevents your tires from moving together, and a lot of other things do too. So one of them is gonna wanna skip, and that is going to cause the death wobble that you feel in your steering wheel. If your tires are like this, obviously they're gonna wanna spread apart. There's that. They're gonna wanna spread apart, and then also they're gonna be limited, so that's gonna cause a hop, and then that will send your steering wheel off. Now, if your tires are out of balance, it's going to send it's not going to be an even rotation going around. It's going to go like whoa, 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 and it'll send more force that way than this one is. And obviously, that's going to translate to a wobble in the steering wheel, and it could definitely throw some things off and cause death wobble. I'm going to show you a list of things you should check in order to fix your death wobble. So the first thing you should check is your track bar bolts. Your track bar is responsible for keeping your axle centered under the frame rails. These are the frame rails, this being the axle, and this being the same. We'll say a foot and a foot. And your track bar is responsible for the side-to-side motion of your axle underneath the frame rail. So if your track bar bolt is loose, your whole axle is going to feel free to move around like this, which will cause your steering wheel to shake and eventually pop into death wobble. The next two things you should check are basically all your tie rod ends, the drag link and the tie rod. If you're looking at it from the front of the car, your drag link goes from the steering box down to the axle, or the knuckle usually, or the tie rod, depending on your setup, and the tie rod will go across like that. There's going to be a joint here, here, and here. If any one of those is bad, it'll cause your steering to shimmy, and that'll throw off your alignment, and obviously it'll cause death wobble. These are relatively inexpensive to fix, and it's definitely something you should check. You can check this by doing the dry steer test. If you just have somebody sit in the car with it on and turn the steering wheel back and forth, you'll be able to see any play in any of those ends. And it's the same thing with the track bar. If you have someone turn the steering wheel back and forth, you'll see any play in those bolts. If your track wire bolts are good, your tie rod ends are good, you should check the ball joints. Now, ball joints, if this is your axle, that's the pumpkin, right? Axle, and you have the knuckle, and you have essentially this contraption that your wheel hangs off of over here, and your ball joints go in here, just like this. And so there'll be one on the top of the knuckle and the bottom of the knuckle. And to check these, you want to jack the car up and shake the wheel this way and that way, if this is your tire. If there's play in it, if it twists like this, if the top goes in, or vice versa, you know your ball joints are bad, you'll probably be able to see it. And that will 100% cause death wobble. If your ball joints are good, you should check your steering box for any excess play. You should definitely be able to tell. Again, you can do the dry steer test. You can probably get underneath and shake it really hard and see if it moves at all. Probably not. You might want to jack the car up and then you can shake the steering and see if there's any extra play. If your steering box is good, you should check your unit bearings. Again, you could probably check these the same time you check your ball joints. Just spin the wheel, shake it, see if there's any play and anything. If anything seems off, you'll probably be able to tell. And usually, if your front end seems louder than normal, like something is just kind of rubbing, or it sounds like your tires got louder or something, it might be your unit bearings. Lastly, if everything mechanical seems good, it's probably just your tire balance. A lot of times with big off-road tires, they get out of balance really easily. It takes one bad alignment to really throw off the weight. Just take your tires to any tire shop, have them check them, and it won't cost you too much. And the number 8 spot, if your tire balance is good, then you should check your steering stabilizer. This is the most controversial part of death wobble. Now, your steering stabilizer, a lot of people will say that it will not fix death wobble, it will only mask it and make things worse. And I don't think that's the case. Basically, your steering stabilizer is just a dampener that sits on your steering and just takes a little bit of dampening from the road. But here's the thing. If your axle is shimmying, back and forth and you're in death wobble, that's going to cause a lot of excess wear on whatever part is weak, and it's going to cause a lot of wear on anything that it stresses when your axle or your tires are, you know, moving around. So if you have a steering stabilizer on and you're not getting death wobble, that's a fix. It's literally, it's not wobbling. Either it is or it isn't. If you still get death wobble with a steering stabilizer, then it's obviously, it's not going to be your steering stabilizer. Save that for last. That's why it's on the bottom of the list. Car manufacturers put steering stabilizers on these vehicles for a reason, and mostly it's probably just to dampen the vibrations and make your steering more comfortable. But it does, however, keep your tie rod planted. If you hit a bump, it will help to keep it stable. Obviously, that's what it does. So if you put a new steering stabilizer on there and you don't get death wobble anymore, still check this list, but you're probably fine. If you do get death wobble after putting a new steering stabilizer on, it's no big deal. They're not very expensive. Just move down the list. So yeah, I hope that clears things up for anybody that watched this for that reason.